Shalom Mishpacha, welcome back to another episode of A Small Sanctuary with Rabbi Esther, and today we are starting the first part of our multiple part series about Jewish identity, belonging, and covenant. And in this episode, we are going to explore what the Jewish people is. Who are the Jewish people? How are we defined? One of the most common questions Jewish people get from their non-Jewish friends or loved ones is, how do you define who you are? And I actually think that the lack of clarity around understanding who Jews are is something that really lingers in our culture. And so today I am going to clarify as best as I can this complex identity of being Jewish. This episode will look at part 1, identity. Belonging and covenant will be treated in future episodes. As we talked about in our introductory episode of the series, identity is your inner sense of Jewishness. And we are also going to talk a little bit about identity versus status. Identity being how you define your own Jewishness internally, and status being how other people define your Jewishness externally. But before we get into that, I want to give us a brief definition of Jewishness as it is often defined in the understanding of the public. So you'll often hear people talk about how Judaism is an ethno-religion. But what actually is an ethno-religion? In order to really figure that out, we have to talk about what is a religion and what is ethnos. And there are a lot of misunderstandings about both these terms. So a religion is a set of beliefs, practices, and communal commitments in service of a belief about the divine, sacred practice, or the universe. An ethnicity is an in-group defined by a common heritage, language, culture, historical identity, and sense of future destiny, which may or may not be lineage-based, and which may or may not have a genetic component. And this is really important to understand, because in the anthropological definition, the sociological definition of ethnicity, genetics are not really part of it. And this is often how the real definition of ethnicity, the academic definition, gets confused with the colloquial definition, which is basically a polite way of asking where someone's genotype or phenotype is from. But that is actually an incorrect way of using the word, or at least partially incorrect. So if we have a group that has a shared heritage and sense of belonging and a shared sense of moral and religious commitments, we call that an ethno-religion. Now, Judaism isn't the only ethno-religion in the world. There are many ethno-religions. And in fact, ethno-religion is basically how a lot of human social groups were organized historically. It is only in modernity that we've become less familiar with this idea, and that is why it causes so much confusion. In the ancient world, most religions were ethno-religions. There was no real distinction between an abstract set of theological principles and the community and the people you belonged to. This was the case for the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the ancient Babylonians, and for us Jews. In a modern world where religions are defined more abstract and where we live in nation states, in countries with political borders, which are political entities, the idea of an ethno-religion is a little harder to grasp for most people. Now, I want to be really clear that an ethno-religion doesn't mean that there are closed borders. Many ethnicities and ethno-religions have mechanisms for letting people join their community. In the case of Judaism, that is called conversion, and we will talk more about that another time. Having said all that, what are Jews? Well, are we a nation, a people, a tribe, a culture, dare I say, a race? And this is exactly where the confusion comes in, because we are an ethno-religion. So yes, we are also a tribe and a culture and a nation and a religion. But the one thing we're not is a race. Race is a social construct. There is no biological reality that divides the human species into separate races. Jews may share common ancestry based in the Levant, the ancient Near East, or other parts of the world, but not all Jews need to share genetic heritage in order to belong to the one and the same Jewish people. I understand this is really confusing. Instead, this is how I choose to define Judaism. Let's take a stab at it. I define Judaism as a global, multi-ethnic, religious civilization with open boundaries, sharing a common myth of its own origins and a common sense of its own destiny. What this definition does is acknowledge that there are many ways to be Jewish. We are ethnically diverse, phenotypically diverse, i.e. how we look, and that we are geographically diverse as well. Jews live all over the world, in all countries and territories, and any place I can really imagine. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of Jewish scientists on Antarctica. I like my definition better because it is a more inclusive definition that doesn't account only for the main sub-ethnic groups within the Jewish people: Ashkenazim Jews of European descent, Sephardim Jews of Iberian descent and Middle Eastern descent, and Mizrahim Jews of Asian and African descent. This also figures in emerging Jewish communities ranging from Latin America to Africa to Asia to Europe and North America that come to Judaism either because of a belief in an ancient heritage that they are reclaiming or through the process of full conversion. Having said that, let's go into the second part of this video and talk about Jewish identity and Jewish status and how those two things are actually different. As I said earlier, Jewish identity is what you feel inside about who you are at the very core of your being as a Jew. It is an internal definition of self. Jewish status, however, is either a communal, religious, legal definition imposed from the outside on whether you in a given community get to have the status of a Jew and have the benefits, obligations, and rights of being part of the Jewish polity or part of the Jewish community. Secondly, I would like to say that Jewish identity is inviolable. No one gets to arbitrate another person's sense of self. If you feel Jewish inside, that may or may not correspond with reality or with a community's norms, but no one has the right to challenge that or take that away from you because your identity is sacred to who you are. Status, however, may need to meet certain criteria, and these criteria can vary from Jewish community to Jewish community. A wise teacher of mine in rabbinical school once said that the pain happens when Jewish identity and Jewish status do not overlap. So it's important to bring those two in alignment with each other and find a community where that belonging is fostered. This challenge in the Jewish community applies to a number of different cases because there is no universal definition of Jewishness. So people who have Jewish parentage on the father's side, patrilineality, for instance, may be recognized in some communities but not in other communities, while overall matrilineality, parentage through the mother's side, is seen as universal. There are also different standards between communities around conversion, recognition of status, adoption, and people who would discover at a later life that they are Jewish. All of these cases can be highly individual and highly contextual, and so my advice here on the internet is to talk to your own friendly neighborhood rabbi who you trust and who aligns with your values. But this is also where we need to be sensitive, because this is often a point of contention in Jewish communities and people can feel really unwelcome and excluded and alienated. And that is, of course, the last thing we want. We here are committed to an inclusive vision of Judaism and to help people find the community that can validate both their internal sense of Jewishness and find ways to validate their external Jewish status. Jewish status works in two ways. Historically, already for thousands of years, especially in what we call the rabbinic period, you can be a Jew either through inherited status or through acquired status. In the case of inherited status, you are born from someone who is already a Jew. Acquired status is, of course, conversion or affirmation. Some rabbis use different terms depending on the context. If someone is validating their acquired status but already has some Jewish lineage or identity or previous inheritance through their parentage, then we often talk in terms of an affirmation in order not to erase the prior identity that they have already had for their life. In terms of the actual procedures, it is the same process. Conversion is going to be another video, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that. But knowing that there are these two ways in which you can belong to the Jewish people, through acquired status and through inherited status, is really foundational. We are not a closed system, and we haven't been ever. One of the many questions that comes up for people living in Jewish communities or entering Jewish communities is, how do I find my sense of belonging? What do I do when my status doesn't overlap with my identity? How can I navigate that internally? It is upsetting, it is difficult. And my advice is twofold. First of all, bolstering your sense of self internally is really key. You need to be confident in knowing who you are and what your commitments are to your Judaism, and build from the inside outward so that you do not rely on spiritual or emotional validation on someone else, or at least as little as possible. The second part is external. Find a Jewish community who aligns with your values, either the Jewish community you're already in, or if you're concerned about recognition or practice or halakha, find maybe a stricter Jewish community, maybe a more lenient Jewish community, where you feel you belong, and validate your status through that community. The first option is actually the really essential starting point, where we need to feel secure in who we are. It is between us and the Holy One of Blessing. No one else gets to arbitrate how we feel inside. Of course, communities do get to arbitrate who belongs and how they set those standards and procedures, and communities do. But how those procedures are set and how those standards are adhered to, no matter the stringency or the path into those communities, those standards should be just, fair, and compassionate. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect and compassion as they navigate the very complicated world of acquiring Jewish status. Given that Judaism is this global, multi-ethnic, diverse civilization, there is an element of fluidity to Judaism. And I think it's really important when you talk about Jewish identity to not just focus on the religious aspects of that identity. And that brings me to part 3 of this video. Jewish sociologists like talking about a pie chart, if you will, in which you imagine the pie of your Jewishness, and you are going to carve it into different slices, and each slice has a different size as per the priority or the sense of belonging you ascribe to each of these different slices. So for some Jews, the slice that says religion might be very large, or it might be very small. For other Jews, the slice that says culture or heritage, or even Holocaust, if that applies, or connection to Israel, or values or ethics, community, whatever it be, you can survey your own sense of Jewishness and assign value or sizing to the slices of your Jewish identity pie. The question is, what is most important to you in your Jewish life? And it's very important to remember that this can change over time. You can become more religious or less religious, more connected to community or less connected to community, find comfort in Jewish culture more or less, or in certain Jewish cultures, but nobody else gets to arbitrate or judge how you get to define your pie or carve it up. When we look at Jewish identity, for many Jews, there is a part that is religious that is significant, and for others, that's not the case. And a Halakhic definition of Jewishness, aka a Jewish religious legal definition according to rabbis, in which rabbi, in which denomination, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Ultra-Orthodox, Hasidic, be what may, is not necessarily as a sociological definition of what Jews are and who belong. This is also the difference between something like the Pew Report, which researches Jewish identity, and however rabbis define who has Jewish status. And if you want to honor the people in your life who may have a different take on Judaism than you, I think it's really important to remember that we speak to each other with compassion and respect, irrespective of where we come from. Of course, one person's Jewish identity might not be yours, and you may disagree with it. You may disagree with the existence of an exclusively secular identity, or you may disagree with an exclusively religious identity, or you might have disagreements about the kind of theology that's practiced. And there is a recognition that as a religious civilization that is not about doctrine, but about belonging, the edges of the identity and belonging are fluid. I trained as a social scientist before I became a rabbi. I find this endlessly fascinating. And as a rabbi, I try to have the conversations with kindness and respect. At the end of the day, concluding thoughts, Jewish identity is very much what you make of it and how you find your place in a Jewish community that will align itself with and honor what you already know to be true about your own neshama, your own Jewish soul. If you have a sense of being right with yourself, if you are confident in your own Jewishness, if you feel joy about your own Jewishness, then barring geographical constraints, you will find your place of belonging. And if there are geographical constraints, then the internet is a wonderful place for creating Jewish community digitally. Next time, we are going to talk about Jewish belonging. We're going to take the internal inner journey of the individual and transition it to belonging to a Jewish community and being part of the Jewish collective. What it means, what it looks like, how you find your way into a Jewish community, what are the blessings and challenges of Jewish community, but that will have to wait until next time. Thank you for joining me today on the small sanctuary with this slightly more abstract topic, but I hope it helps clarify who the Jewish people are and why our identity is so rich and so complex and so multifaceted. Thank you for joining me today. Shalom uvracha, with peace and blessings from my bite to your bite. Bye.